When the Cleveland Browns made the move last week to go to rookie Dylan Gabriel over Joe Flacco, there were a lot of folks that thought maybe we have seen the last of Joe Flacco forever until Jeff Lloyd, BetCanada channel. Tuesday's news, probably a quiet day in the NFL. The Cincinnati Bengals sitting at 2-3 and growing tired of Jake Browning's interceptions made a move with the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns send Joe Flacco and a 2026 sixth-round selection to the Cincinnati Bengals for their 2026 fifth-round selection. There's a couple things that kind of stand out from this right off the bat for me. I think first, I don't think the Cincinnati Bengals are in a rush necessarily to get Joe Burrow back, but Joe Burrow himself might be in a rush to get back if there is something to get back for. So if the Cincinnati Bengals are still hovering somewhere near 500 by December, and we were told originally that Joe Burrow's injury could be 3 months, that sets up a timeline where Joe Burrow would possibly be ready to come back in December. Jake Browning, and it's similar with Jake Browning to Joe Flacco. In 2023, Jake Browning, in an extended role as the quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals, was actually playing pretty well. He was turning it over, but he was making more plays than he was turnovers. Thus far in 2025, that has not been the case for Jake Browning. He's turning the ball over at an alarming rate. And unfortunately, with the other deficiencies on the Cincinnati Bengals, the team is just not strong enough in other positions to cope with the turnovers that Browning is giving up. There was a point on Sunday where Jamar Chase had more solo tackles than he did receptions. Now, Joe Flacco comes in to Cincinnati, and not necessarily the cure all, be all that the Bengals were probably hoping for. Number one in the NFL in interceptions right now is Jake Browning. Number two in the NFL in interceptions right now is Joe Flacco. And keep in mind, Joe Flacco has done it in only 4 games. Browning, 4.5. So Flacco comes in, certainly a veteran presence. And I think the thing that was working with Joe Flacco in 2023 with the Browns that was not working in 2025 with the Browns was just having wide receivers that can get open down the field. Joe Flacco's game has always been as a downfield passer. The Browns, with a very, very relatively young offense, like a lot of rookies and several second-year players, the Browns' offense is just not equipped for what Joe Flacco still maybe had in the holster at his age. However, the Cincinnati Bengals, with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, tight end Mike Gesicki, Chase Brown out of the backfield, this offense could be more suited for seeing Joe Flacco be successful at the age of 40 years old. There is one linear problem for Joe Flacco going from Cleveland to Cincinnati. The Cleveland Browns offensive line was not very good. However, the Cincinnati Bengals offense might be worse. And for Joe Flacco at 40 years old, the mobility it's apparent how much it is no longer there. So for Flacco, if he can just take snaps, get into a spot and release the ball, these are still things Joe Flacco can do, and he still throws the ball with a pretty good amount of velocity. But the pocket's got to be clean. You can't really expect Joe Flacco to break sacks. You certainly can't expect Joe Flacco to pick you up 7 yards on 3rd and 6. But with receivers like Chase and Higgins, if they get separation and they get open downfield like they have shown the tendency to do throughout their careers, Joe Flacco could probably bring a little magic to that Cincinnati Bengals offense. This is Jeff Lloyd. This is the BetCanada channel. Now for the Browns. There's always a weird dynamic with the Browns quarterback room. Look, the Browns were in desperate and dire search for a franchise quarterback, a sustainable guy that could carry this franchise for years to come in the 2025 offseason. But the reality of the matter is there just wasn't one available to them. Yes, Daniel Jones has looked good. Yes, Sam Darnold has looked good. But these were players that were looking elsewhere, and not necessarily that the Cleveland Browns were high in on either guy anyway. So the Browns assembled a quarterback room of Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, Dylan Gabriel, and Shador Sanders, the latter two being rookies. They were not going to throw Gabriel or Sanders to the Wolves. So Joe Flacco, pretty much without much of a fight, won the training camp battle to become the number one quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. And to say Joe looked like the starter week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, it just not necessarily wasn't the case. What Joe and the magic that Joe Flacco had with the Browns in 2023 was just not the same in 2025. I was one that was highly against the Browns reacquiring Joe Flacco because a lot of times you just don't get that magic back a second time. And that was certainly the case for Flacco and the Browns. When the Browns made the decision last week to go to Dylan Gabriel to start the game in London against the Minnesota Vikings, that pretty much put the writing on the wall that the quarterback room for the Cleveland Browns for the remainder of the 2025 season was going to be about evaluating rookies. First off, Dylan Gabriel, and perhaps sometime in December, Shador Sanders. They were just not going to put in a rookie, see how he played, and then decide that Flacco was going to go back in and be the guy. So the question was, where did that leave Joe Flacco? And I don't think many people felt that there was going to be a trade market for Joe Flacco. And there's certainly some factors, his play, his age, but also Joe at this point of his life and his point of his career has a desire to kind of play somewhat close to the East Coast to his large family and at least get some time around his children. He's not going to uproot his entire family for a half a season and now a second half a season as he goes to Cincinnati. So he wants to be able, when he's done on Sunday with games, get home, get back to New Jersey, spend some time with his family, and be back in town to begin practice the following week. Not a lot of teams are going to be that willing with a guy that they are going to potentially call their starting quarterback. The Cincinnati Bengals are in a desperate spot. They feel that Joe Flacco can maybe navigate the waters for them until there is a possibility that Joe Burrow could return to the lineup. It's going to require Cincinnati to win some games. Right now, they're sitting at 2-3. So to say they're out of it just isn't necessarily the case. But this team is absolutely going to have to go on a run. So if the Bengals can do that with Joe Flacco, it opens back up that window of possibly contending here in 2025 if Joe Burrow can become healthy by December and then maybe carry this team through a December run, which gets them into the playoffs. And Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins versus anybody is a matchup that a lot of people would favor. That's how good Joe Burrow is. That's how good Jamar Chase is. And T. Higgins is probably the best number 2 wide receiver in the entire NFL. More folks would talk about him if his running mate was not Jamar Chase. But certainly an interesting move today. The Browns are able to move off of a quarterback who no longer didn't have a future, but no longer even had a present with the Cleveland Browns. They swap picks. Browns get a 5th round pick from Cincinnati. The Bengals get a 6th round pick from the Browns in addition to Joe Flacco. So at age 40, have arm, will travel. Joe Flacco headed to the Cincinnati Bengals. Jeff Lloyd, the BetCanada channel. Like the video, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you all next time.